This resource has been created to assist GT coordinators and GT teachers who are new to the program or who have less than 3 years of experience. So this is today's agenda. We'll talk about responsibilities for the GT coordinator. We'll talk about the gifted regulation. We'll talk about resources that hopefully will be helpful for you. We'll also talk about Infinite Campus and the data standards, and we'll talk a little bit about funding. So let's jump right into responsibilities. So as the GT coordinator in your district, first of all, you are the contact between the state and the district. And by state, I mean we here at the Kentucky Department of Education. So it is very helpful for us to know who are our points of contact. And we do that through the Kentucky Department of Education Open House Directory. So when you know there has been a change in a role, it's best to contact the WAPOC or the Web Applications Administrator point of contact and let them know that you are the new gifted and talented education coordinator in your district. Or if it changes to someone else, it's very helpful for us to know who that point of contact will be. Also, if you would, please add the GT coordinator to the EPSB role manager. And to do that, you need to contact the human resources representative. Another responsibility is to oversee the program, the gifted program, to ensure compliance with the regulations, to make sure that students are being screened, that identifications are taking place, children are receiving services, and if there's any grievances about either services or appeals that have to do with identification, that you oversee those. Also, it's the gifted coordinator's role to ensure that there are certified staff that are hired to provide direct services to GT students. We want to make sure that students are receiving services that meet their interests and needs and abilities. Also, as a gifted and talented coordinator, the GTC, you will be facilitating the Gifted and Talented Selection and Placement Committee. We'll cover that a little bit more when we talk about the regulation. You are also the contact for data in your district. So you may want to make sure that new gifted and talented student records are entered correctly. But if there are any missing records, that you make sure that when children are transferred to your district, that there's a process in place to make sure that those records are imported. And we want to make sure that the counts are correct for the end of the year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too as we proceed through this training. Also, you want to monitor gifted service options that are implemented throughout the district. So as we've got students who receive services, it is the role of the GT Selection and Placement Committee to provide those services, to discuss those services that will be on the Gifted Student Service Plan. But then it is your job as the GTC to ensure that those services are being implemented and that students are receiving services. Finally, the GTC is also the financial liaison between the state and the district. So you want to make sure that those funds are spent correctly. And if you're not sure, how much funds you're receiving for your district, you can go to the state grant webpage and you can find how much money your district has been allocated there. Also on that page, you'll see a state matrix, and the state matrix gives you the codes and which codes are allowable for spending the state money. And finally, then, it's your job to collaborate and communicate with staff. So you want to make sure that any emails that you receive and other information is forwarded to appropriate staff, such as teachers or CASES contacts. CASES stands for Kentucky System, Kentucky Student Information System. And sometimes that person may be the technology admin in your district, or there may be another person that's been assigned that role. If you go into the Kentucky Department of Education's open house directory and find your district, the CASES contact is a role that's listed there on that page. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're collaborating with administrators, supervisors, parents. You are just the liaison to all things gifted education in your district. Also, it is the GTC's responsibility to ensure that professional development is ongoing and that there's appropriate training for all the staff that work with GT students. So your certified staff who provide direct instructional services, of course, will need professional development. But also, we know that many of our students are in the regular classroom for most of their day. And so those staff that work with the gifted students need to know, first of all, who those students are in their classes and what they're identified for so that they can help with providing services for those students if need be in their classrooms. Also, it's the job of the GTC to oversee the program evaluation. So this is an evaluation that takes place once a year, usually towards the end of the school year. And there will be several different areas that we'll talk about when we get to that part of the regulation. But you're going to want to collect that data and analyze that data, share that information with the appropriate people in your district, and then make future plans and modifications, perhaps, based on the data that you collect from your program evaluation. Also, at the end of the year, because of regulation, there is a summative evaluation report that will need to be submitted to KDE, as well as a GT records validation and a school report card validation. And we'll talk about that more at the end of year training. And just a few words about the GT teacher, because sometimes I know the GT teacher and the coordinator sometimes are the same person in a district, sometimes not. But the GT teacher is, if working with the coordinator will usually be that person's supervisor. But the teacher needs to provide those direct instructional services to students. They need to be looking at, of course, the Gifted Student Service Plan to see what those services have been decided by the GT committee. Students, by regulation, have to be offered multiple service options. And so, again, those services are decided by the GT Selection and Placement Committee. And then any other duties as assigned by the district supervisor. Oftentimes, it's been my experience that the GT teacher works alongside the coordinator to complete the end of year reports, also to help her with any data, him or her with data that needs to be entered into Infinite Campus, reports, ensuring that transfer students from other districts or out of state receive services. If students are out of state, that's kind of a different question there. But if the students from out of state meet Kentucky regulations, then they could perhaps be identified as a GT student in the state of Kentucky. Let's next talk about the gifted regulation. The gifted regulation, or Kentucky Administrative Regulation, KAR, is 704 KAR 3:285. So the gifted regulation has several sections. The first section is an introduction, and it covers the definition of gifted students and that districts must have a gifted program. In our state, Kentucky's students are a category of exceptional children. Now, we do not receive IDEA or special education funds because children in the state of Kentucky are not seen as children with a disability. So, but we are considered to be exceptional. Gifted students are considered to be a category of exceptional children. There are 10 sections in the regulation, and we'll cover those kind of at a high level overview here in the next several slides. So first of all, the introduction to the regulation says that GT students are a category of exceptional children and that all districts must have a gifted program. It also gives the 5 categories, and then I've also broken down those 5 categories into the subcategories. So in the state of Kentucky, we have creativity or divergent thinking, general intellectual ability, leadership, specific academic aptitude, which is broken down in our state into math, English language arts, science, and social studies. Also, we have visual and performing arts, which is broken down into art, dance, drama, and music. Next, we have sections 1 and sections 2. Section 1 covers the definition and of many of the terms that are used in the regulation. For example, there are definitions for cluster grouping, collaborative teaching, GT selection and placement committee, high potential learner, and underachieving. Those are just some of the definitions, and I've given you the numbers out beside each one of those words that are used in the regulation. And it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with these terms because some of the definitions that we associate with some of these terms are not the ones that we might usually think that they would be. So it's a good idea to look over those terms and be aware of what they are. Section 2 is about policies and procedures. And Section 2 says that you have to have policies and procedures for all of the sections in the regulation, and that those policies and procedures have to be available for public inspection, that they need to be locally board approved, and the procedures, again, must address each requirement in the regulation. Now, oftentimes you'll find your policies and procedures are posted on your Board of Education, part of your district web page, and most school districts use the Kentucky School Board Association, KSBA, policies and procedures. So it's a good idea to check to ensure that you've got your policies and procedures publicly posted somewhere. And so these could be posted on your GT webpage or, downloaded and then linked somewhere on your GT webpage. But it's a very good idea to make sure that you're familiar with what those policies and procedures are for your district. Section 3 is one of the longer sections in the regulation, and it is about screening and identifying students in grades K through 12 for the gifted program. Primary talent pool students, or PTP students, are informally identified, and formal measures can be used to assist with the level of services that are offered, but formal measures cannot be used to find a student ineligible for primary talent pool. Also, it covers criteria for formally identifying students in grades 4 through 12. There are criteria for each of the 5 categories that I talked about earlier. And it also talks about that there has to be a diagnostic screening process that allows for equal access for racial and ethnic minorities, disadvantaged, and children with disabilities. Section 3 also talks about the district must implement a procedure, gather information to create the Gifted Student Service Plan. And this Gifted Student Service Plan needs to meet students' interests and needs and abilities. Section 3 also says that parents must be annually notified about services that their student will receive. Section 3 also talks about the districts must have a way to implement a procedure to gather input from parents about services that will be considered for the Gifted Student Service Plan. There are Gifted Student Service Plan forms in Infinite Campus. There is a newer form that was published to districts through Infinite Campus in June of 2023, and it automatically populates from the GT record at Infinite Campus. For more information on how to create and see the Gifted Student Service Plan, please see the data standards for gifted and talented. There'll be links to a video and also presentation on how to create this newer Gifted Student Service Plan. Next, we've got Section 4. Section 4 is about procedures for determining eligibility for services. So in this section, it talks about that districts have to have a system for inserting the entire school population on a continuous basis for gifted and talented students. So although we start that process of formal identification in 4th grade, it's not a one and done type process. We want to remember that we are continually looking for students 4th through 12th grade, especially, if you've got a student who comes into your district who is from another state or from another district, and they have not been identified as gifted and talented. We want to make sure that we've screened them and possibly assess them for one of the 5 categories or for multiple of the 5 categories, make sure we haven't missed anybody. And then we also, the section talks about that local or national norms may be used to identify students. Now, sometimes local norms may seem to be a topic that's not well understood, and so if that's something that you'd like to know more about on the GT Coordinator One Stop, there is a PowerPoint and a recording about local norms and how to use them, what they are. So please take advantage of that resource. And this particular section also talks about the GT Selection and Placement Committee. So the GT Selection and Placement Committee has 4 responsibilities that are listed in the regulation. And one of those responsibilities is to ensure that the student evidence that's gathered for the student meets the regulation identification criteria. Another responsibility is to communicate about the program to the people in your school buildings as well as to the community, and to publicize what's going on, perhaps what's going on in the GT program. Also to talk about maybe in professional learning communities or PLCs or faculty meetings about the program, to let people know that you're constantly looking for gifted and talented students, to point them in the direction of how to refer students. If you've got forms that are online, to show them where those are, and to just be kind of the mouthpiece, if you will, for the gifted program. And so please look at all of the Section 4 there about the responsibilities for the GT Selection and Placement Committee. Also, Section 4 talks about special considerations. And so special considerations are the exceptions to the regulation identification criteria. And if you're not very familiar with what special considerations are, there is a recording and a presentation about special considerations on the GT Coordinator One Stop, and it covers what special considerations are, and how a district should use them when identifying students for the gifted program. And it's going to talk about that when we think about special considerations or exceptions to the criteria in the regulation, that we're thinking about any kind of disabling conditions which might mask a student's gifts and talents that might make them seem ineligible for the gifted program. And staff have to consider environmental, cultural, and disabling conditions that might be keeping a student from showing all of their talent, or from looking maybe like our typical gifted and talented student. 3 of the populations that are mentioned as examples to be thinking about for special considerations are students with an IEP, disadvantaged students. These can be students who are either economically or socially or culturally disadvantaged in some way, and also underachieving. And just a side note here, that if you do identify a student using special considerations, that there is a special way to record that in Infinite Campus on the GT student record. You will see a drop down for that student that's under special considerations, and it lists either, special education, disadvantaged, and underachieving. And just a note there that when you have a student, maybe they're an English language student, and because of their different culture, or because they're learning English, but they're still very bright, you would select disadvantaged there, because when you look at the different definition in the regulation for disadvantaged, it talks about students who may have, a cultural consideration that we need to be thinking about. So please look at that definition of disadvantaged and also underachieving, and it will help you as you're thinking about students who should be thought about for exceptions or for special considerations for the gifted program identification. Next is Section 5. Section 5 is all about the annual program evaluation. And so districts must have policies and procedures for annually conducting a program evaluation. Oftentimes this is done towards the end of the year so that you have data that you can look at and collect. And these policies and procedures need to cover the components that are listed as bullets there on the slide. And so this data must be collected and used for school and district instructional planning process. I think that kind of makes sense when you think about it. So you're going to collect the data from these different topics here. And then after you have collected all that data, then you're going to want to make future program directions and modifications, perhaps, if needed, for the next school year. Some district policies and procedures also say that you're going to take the data that you've collected and you're going to share it with your SBDM or with the school board to let them know how the gifted education program is doing in the district and if they are meeting district goals. So the first section that you're going to collect data from is overall student progress. There's different ways that you can collect student progress. It's a little more challenging for the areas that aren't specifically assessed by the state or maybe by your district. But you can use diagnostic data from math and language arts to help you with that. Of course, there's also, classroom assessments that can help you with, ascertaining how students are progressing towards their goals. Also, you want to collect student, parent, and faculty attitudes about the program. It's really important that all of these stakeholders, that you get input from all of them, not just our parents and our faculty, but also from our student. We want to have a student voice about the gifted program. It really gives you some insight into what people think about the gifted education program and to help you with making any modifications or changes that you might need to make. Community involvement, that can be related to, how is the community involved in your program? Do you have people who are maybe coming to speak to your children about different topics? Or are your children involved in activities out in the community? How are they doing in your school community? That type of thing. And your GT selection and placement committee members ought to be able to help you think of different ways that students can be involved in your community, either in the school or out in the town or city community. Cost effectiveness. So how is the money being used from the grant or from other sources of income? Incorporation of gifted education into the regular school program. So how is gifted education being utilized? Are y'all modifying the curriculum? Are you supplementing the curriculum? Are you differentiating the curriculum? What is your strategy for incorporating gifted education into the regular school program? Another topic is overall quality of instruction and program personnel credentials. So, as you think about who is providing services for your gifted education students, your GT students, how are those people prepared to work with those students, be they in the regular classroom or those resource services? And then after you've gathered all that information, it's really important to sit down with your committee or your GT teacher, your supervisors, all of the above, and discuss, future program directions and modifications for the next school year. Section 5 also talks about the data that's collected in the annual program evaluation needs to be used in school and district instructional planning. So this can be done in different ways. As I said before, you can meet with your supervisors, your administrators, your committee. You can share this information with the Board of Education or with your school-based decision-making councils in your schools, to talk about, what's going on in the program and, get their feedback on what might need to take place, any changes that might need to be taking place, that type of thing. The last part of Section 5 deals with progress that needs to be reported. And this isn't just progress that we would have in our regular type of report card progress. This is progress that's specifically related to the Gifted Student Service Plan. How are students progressing as it relates to the services that are being offered through the GSSP? And the regulation says that this progress needs to be reported once each semester. And there is a progress report in Infinite Campus. It's a custom editable form that you can use that can be seen in the parent portal. I don't think I mentioned this before, but the Gifted Student Service Plan can also be seen in the parent portal. The next section is Section 6. This is about services for GT students. And it basically says that students in grades K through 12 must have multiple service options. So you can't just say, well, we're going to have differentiation in the regular classroom and that be it. The GT committee needs to think about each student and think about what they might need. Does that student need an enrichment opportunity? Does that student need resource pullout? This is a really good time to think about MTSS or those multi-tiered systems of services for students. Is the student going to be able to get the services they need in the regular classroom, or is it going to need to be a tier two service, where they are going to be maybe need to be pulled out for more intensive services with the GT resource specialist, or, is it going to be tier 3 services, or maybe they have resource services with the GT teacher, plus they maybe have an accelerated class that they go to. It is a really good time to think about how MTSS can be a part of the gifted education program. We want these services to meet the student's interests and needs and abilities. So, a student might be identified for math, but maybe they're interested in robotics. So if you're able to maybe offer robotics to the student, that would be a good way to maybe be providing services for a student. So maybe they're having differentiation or pull out from their GT resource teacher in math, but then they're also maybe doing a robotics after school as extracurricular, or those different types of things. Services should be provided during the regular school day unless you have academic competitions or extracurricular activities. But all children need to have services, and they need to have multiple services, so more than one. On this slide, we see a list of services from the regulation that could be provided. Infinite Campus provides definitions for the service delivery options. And if you click on that link, it'll give definitions for all of the different services that you see listed on the slide there. So we've got acceleration, advanced placement and honors, collaborative teaching and consultation, special counseling, differentiated study experiences, distance learning, enrichment services, independent study, mentorships, resource services delivered in a pull-out classroom or other appropriate instructional setting, seminars, travel study options, or special schools or self-contained classrooms. And this is for grades 4 through 12 only. So there's several different service options that are listed there, and it gives you a good list for your GT committee to think about as they think about providing services for each individual student. Section 7 is pretty short. It's about curriculum, and it simply states that the curriculum for gifted students must be differentiated, supplement, modified, or replaced, and that the curriculum needs to meet the students' needs, abilities, and interests. So that's important to be thinking about. What kind of program is your GT program going to be? Is it going to, have enrichment? Is it going to think about acceleration? What policies in place do you have maybe for acceleration? What needs to be differentiated in the classroom? How will you go about doing that? Do you need any kind of supplemental materials if you're going to do any kind of enrichment or a deep dive into, a topic? And then, of course, we always want to be keeping the student at the center of all of our thoughts, and getting to know that student so that we know what their needs and abilities and interests are. So appreciate you hanging in there. We're almost to the end of the regulations section. Section 8 is about personnel, and it states that districts must hire staff to provide direct services to identified students who are appropriately certified by the Education Professional Standards Board, or EPSB. It also states that staff must be GT certified when working directly with students, in addition to the regularly assigned classroom teacher. Section 8 goes on to say that staff have got to be certified, GT certified, if at least half of the day they are working with only GT identified students. And it states that all other personnel who work with GT students must be prepared through professional development to address the needs, interests, and abilities of identified students. So all that to say is, if you've got questions about certification, it's really important to contact the EPSB. And I believe I'm going to be giving you their information here in a couple more slides. They're the ones that can answer your certification questions. They are the best resource for certification. Section 9 is budget and funding. So simply put, state funds must be used for direct services to identified students. If you're wondering what those services would look like and you're unsure about if the funds can be used, go back and check that state matrix that I talked about that's on the state grants webpage on the KDE website. Direct services must be provided by certified staff as professional qualified and certified by the EPSB. And 704 KAR 20:280 has been recodified to 16 KAR 2:110. So that is the GT certification endorsement, if you want to look at that. It also says that 75% of the GT state funds must be expended to hire certified personnel to provide direct instructional services, excuse me. Section 9, continuing on, it says the district must designate a gifted education coordinator. And if you're wondering if you're certified to be a gifted education coordinator, I believe I have some information on that in a couple of slides here in just a second. It also says that state funding is contingent upon employing properly certified staff to administer and teach in the program. To receive state funding, you've got to submit the end of year report and summative evaluation. That's something that we'll cover in the end of year training. And also you've got to comply with the gifted education regulation. So this slide is about gifted coordinator certification. This comes from 16 KAR 4:010. This is section 7 from that regulation. And it says a gifted education coordinator shall qualify for the position based on the following. 1, a master's degree or non-degree 5th year program. 2, a certificate endorsement for teacher of gifted education. And 3 years of teaching experience. If you don't have those requirements above, please contact EPSB. This is their contact information. They are the Division of Education Certification and Preparation. There is their phone number, their fax, and also their email that you can reach out to them if you've got questions about either teacher or coordinator certification. We've come to the last section of the regulation. This is about procedural safeguards. So section 10 is about safeguards that regard concerns about services. So it says the district must have a procedure for parents and students to contact the district if they have concerns about services. These procedures, again, are usually a KSBA procedure. You can find that on your board education website, but they have to include these components: how and by whom the grievance is started. And so often what I have seen for KSBA policies is that the parent or guardian submits something in writing to the district. There has to be a process for determining the need to evaluate or reevaluate the student for services. Also, there needs to be criteria for determining if the placement needs revision, talking about services there, services placement, and then procedures for ensuring services are provided to all identified students. And these procedures must include the participation of the parent or guardian, a regular education teacher of the student, GT teacher or coordinator, administrator, and a counselor in addressing this grievance. So it's not just decided by one person, but must include participation of those people I mentioned. Also, section 10 covers, as I said before, who must be invited to this process or a part of this process. And section 10 just lists who those people are. Right. So let's kind of take a different direction here for a second. This next section is going to cover beneficial resources, including those on the GT Coordinator One Stop. The One Stop is a SharePoint site with training and informational resources for GT coordinators. So several years ago, we at the department decided to make our outward-facing KDE Gifted Resources page more parent or guardian friendly, and then to put all of the training resources for GT staff and administrators on the SharePoint site, because parents don't really need to know about beginning and the end of year trainings, those type of things. So again, we have moved our training resources to the GT Coordinator One Stop. In order to access a One Stop, you'll need to reach out to me for me to give you access to the One Stop. I've tried to go ahead and be proactive and add everyone who is a GT coordinator to the One Stop. But if you're a teacher and I don't know who you are, please reach out to me and I will add you, give you access to the GT Coordinator One Stop, because it could be very beneficial to coordinators as well as, of course, GT teachers. So on the coordinator, there are diagnostic suggested screening instruments. There's also sample checklist and forms. There is the Gifted Student Service Plan training, which I mentioned before, for the newer, not new, but newer. Like I said, it was published last summer, or I guess it depends on when you watch this PowerPoint, but it was published in June of 2023. Also, there's PowerPoint on twice exceptional students and also special considerations. And there should be ELA credit from almost any of these recordings and presentations if you need that. Make sure I've covered everything that I see in my notes here. All right, here are some other GT resources. So if you're interested in working with a mentor, please click on a mentor link and provide your information on the Google form. Sometimes if you're a new coordinator, it's good to pair up with somebody who's maybe close to you to kind of pick their brain about how they do things or what to start with, because it can be very overwhelming at times to be the GT coordinator. And especially if you're the GT coordinator and the GT teacher, and or if you're a GT coordinator that wears several hats. And so I've been in this position going on several years now. I think this is 12 currently as I'm recording this. And so I can hopefully pair you up with somebody who has kind of the same demographics that you do in your job role to help you with that. Also, we have regional GT cadres that meet across the state. I believe there's probably about 9 of them, I believe, across the state. And they meet usually either in the fall or spring or quarterly. They are a great source of support and just giving ideas. And it's good if you're able to meet with them. If you don't know who they are, just click on the regional GT cadres there. It'll give you a cooperative and information about who you can contact to find out where your regional cadre meets, or you can contact me and I can get you in touch with the GT cadre in your area. Also, there are trainings and recordings, as I've mentioned, in PowerPoints on the GT Coordinator One Stop. And there's hopefully a wealth of information on there that will help you. And then weekly, the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, in which the gifted education program that I work with, we send out a weekly newsletter, and it's called News You Can Use. And then we also have a quarterly newsletter that goes out in an email. So I've tried to add all of the GT coordinators that I know about to the listserv to make sure that you were receiving the news you can use. Just a little side note about the news you can use. There are several programs in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, and Gifted Education is just one of those programs. Also in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, or as I like to call it, OSEAL, we also have preschool, early learning, special education, and extended school services. So I am definitely not the only program in OSEAL. And so when you get that newsletter, it's going to have a lot of announcements for the different programs in my office. So you might just want to do a Control F on your keyboard and look for Gifted to help you kind of peel away the layers. Or if you want, please read everything. You'll also notice that there is a spotlight section on there. So if you feel like there's something going on in your district that is something you'd like to share with other gifted education coordinators and teachers, please send us, fill out the Google form there and let us know the great things that you're doing in your district. Here are some web pages that you might find beneficial as you're starting on your GT journey. There is a National Association for Gifted Children. This is the National Advocacy Group for Gifted Children, and there are GT program standards. There's lots of resources for teachers and parents on this site. Also, the Javits Grant, which is the only federal grant in our nation, supports the National Center for Research on Gifted Education. And so if you're interested in watching videos about research that's going on in gifted education, that's a really good place to look. We also, in our own state, we have the Kentucky Association for Gifted Association for Gifted Education. This is also an advocacy group, but it's on our state level. They offer professional development for teachers and administrators in the fall and the spring. They give a gifted education update, usually early September or late August. There are lots of different links to good resources on their webpage, and they also are trying to build up resources for parents in our state. Another resourceful page that you might find helpful is Hoagie's Gifted Education page. It's just a potpourri of really good resources for parents, for teachers, administrators, and for students. And then also in our state, we have some special academies. So if you have students who are maybe entering the 10th grade, they can go to either Gatton or Craft Academies if they're accepted through their application system. And so for more information about Gatton and Craft, please click on those links on this slide. Next, I want to talk about Infinite Campus. Infinite Campus is kind of the data source for all things that have to do with our student information system. So you're going to need rights to reports and other things in Infinite Campus. Again, that is obtained by your CASES contact. Again, if you don't know who that is, you can just you can Google KDE CASES contacts and it'll bring up a list, or you can go to the Open House directory and find your district, and that person's role will be listed there on your page. You're going to need rights and for the GT participation tool. That is where the GT record is entered. You may need system administration rights for custom forms in the parent portal. Usually they don't give system admin rights to the GT coordinator or teacher, but they definitely will work with you to get that set up. And in order to see the newer gifted student service plan and those tools that go along with it, you will need to contact your CASES person. If there are things that you are looking for in Infinite Campus and you don't see them, it's because those rights haven't been turned on for you, and that's why you can't see them. Here are some reports that you're going to need to have access to. There are several state published ad hocs that you'll need access to, especially at the end of the year for cleanup. So there are several ad hocs. There's a student G&T invalid start date. There's validation roster for state testing, invalid gifted category, invalid primary talent pool, invalid specific academic aptitude. And there's also a student G&T student list, but I would urge you to generate your list from the QA Gifted and Talented report. And we're going to look at this Gifted and Talented report in a little more depth here in a second. But the Gifted and Talented report, you can either run as an aggregate where you can see information that compares state and gifted programs, student totals and percentages, or you can run a detailed list so you can see who is in your gifted program. And so that's a really good report to have access to. You'll also want to familiarize yourself with the GT data standards. That's on the one stop because, like I said before, it covers how to enter GT records, how to enter a record if you have a military student, how to create that newer GSSP and progress report, and also about publishing forms to the parent portal. Let's talk a little bit more about the QA Gifted and Talented report. This is how you get to it. This is the click path. Again, you need to have permissions to view it, but then you go to Index and then Kentucky State Reporting, then KDE Reports, then the QA Gifted and Talented report. As I said before, there's a detailed view and there's an aggregate view. So the aggregate view gives you a comparison of numbers between your GT students and your total students in your district to help you as you think about equity and access to your program. And there's 3 pages to the report. So this is the first page, and I've tried to highlight the things that maybe are important on this first page. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's gifted education program information, and then on the right side, there's your total enrollment. And so as you're looking at your averages and your in your programs or your total enrollment, you want them to be, somewhat the same. You want them to be kind of mirror your total enrollment. So, if you've got 10% African American students in your total enrollment, you want there to be about 10% in your gifted and talented program, and so forth and so on. And if you have a disproportionate or you see there's a wide gap there, that's a good opportunity to talk with your GT committee to see, are there any barriers to the program for other cultures, other ethnicities. What could be the reason maybe that there's disproportionality in any of the special populations or populations in the district. The second page is interesting. So it breaks the information down into the categories, including primary talent pool. And so you can look and see, how many students you have overall, and then how many students you have in each of the categories, and then also how many students you have in all of the different populations in your district. And the third page breaks your GT program down by grade level, and it lets you know, how many students you've got in each grade of primary talent pool, as well as how many students you have in the different categories and your different grade levels. And, if you see several zeros in a grade level, that might be a good conversation to have with, your GT committee. If you see that you've got no children in any of your visual and performing arts categories, well, why is that? What can we do to, to make sure that we're identifying students in those categories? So it's good data to have to promote conversations about your program. So as we're talking about, identification and equity, here are some things to think about. First, you want to start, again, like I said, by looking at your program data. And the QA report really helps you look at your data. And next, after you review the data, there are different categories that you can look at. And so you might think about when you've got, next, after you review your data, if there are categories with few or no students identified, your GT committee could review district policies and procedures. Are there, and then also the district could also look at making sure that you're universally screening students for the district. Universally screening all students ensures that students have the opportunity to be considered for the GT services. Another best practice is early identification and giving opportunities at an early age to be identified for the gifted program. So I think one of the programs that's overlooked sometimes is our primary talent pool program. We want to make sure that we are looking for those students in kindergarten through third grade, to make sure that we're engaging them, and then having a wide pool of students to select from later in grades 4 through 12. Something else to think about is local norms. When you think about local norms, what we're doing is we're comparing kind of apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. So best practice is not to just look at local norms on a district way, but to look at students in each building and define those high flyers in each of our buildings. So if you want to know more about that, please click on the link there and either listen or look at the presentation for local norms. And then there's also a really good brochure that was developed by KDE and WKE through the Javits grant for more information as well. And there's also a local norms calculator that's posted on the GT One Stop to help you with looking at students in your buildings as you apply local norms to assessments. The last practice is teacher training. And, you know, for teachers to be able to appropriately recommend students for the gifted program, it's important that they have training. Sometimes staff are asked to recommend students to the program, and they don't mean to, but sometimes they have biases or misunderstandings about gifted education or about gifted students. So training is really important as we rely on our teachers to help us look for and find gifted and talented or advanced students. Another topic I'd like to talk with you about is about GT missing records and data. So it's really important to know that in Infinite Campus, student records don't automatically populate. When a student comes into your district, the information doesn't automatically just all come over with them and get populated into Infinite Campus. And so sometimes districts are missing students on a report that I receive. And I'll be sending you an email notification once in the fall and the spring if you've got students that are on this report. And I'll help you to figure out, you know, how to rectify that. But there is a missing records or missing student records presentation on the GT One Stop. So that should be very helpful as you think about trying to rectifying that your missing records. Often it's because people don't know that you need to click on the Kentucky State Import Wizard. They see that there's a line through GT records or documents, and that's not where the record is. When you see gifted and talented documents, that means that that's where the GSSP is located or some other documentation that's coming over the student. That's not where the records is. Always look or have your person, you know, make sure they click on the Kentucky State Imports Wizard, Reporting Imports Wizard for the GT record or records. Funding. All right, so we've just got a few slides here about funding, about the allocation of funds. So for many years, the gifted education program received about $6.2 million. And then in 2022, the allocation went from 6.2 million to 10 million. And that is where we are still at this point, is at 10 million. That could increase or change, you know, over the next several years, because that money is appropriated by the General Assembly. And so since there was an increase in funding, which was the first significant increase that we'd had in several years, it was decided that we needed to review and change emphasis on the distribution of funds to districts in the Commonwealth. So this is how those funds are appropriated. Each district receives a base amount of $20,000, regardless of the size of the district. And then in addition to that base amount, the formula allocates a per student rate based on the previous school year's total enrollment. If you're wondering what that amount is, those award letters are posted on July the 1st, and they are posted on the KDE State Grant webpage. Again, this is kind of what the non-competitive funding matrix looks like. This is where you can go to see if certain funds can be expended on the gifted program funds can be expended. Don't forget that 75% of those funds must be used to hire certified staff. And if you have any funds left over from that, then you can use those funds to provide services for GT students. If you have any questions about funding, please contact Kristen Burton at the Office of Finance and Operations. There is her email, and there is her phone number and extension.
Thank you for completing the new GT Coordinator training. If you would like to receive ELA credit, please complete the linked Google form or scan the QR code on this slide. If you have any questions or need further assistance, please contact Lynn Lockard, Guidance and Support Branch Manager for the Gifted and Talented Program. The phone number is 502-564-4970, extension 4115, or you may email at lynn.lockard@education.ky.gov. Thank you again for participating in this training.